Good morning, world. Good morning, world. Today I am continuing with part two of microaggression habits, mindfulness as a personal lifestyle determinant of health. In part one, I only covered some of the instances and situations where microaggression take place, and I also talked about um, how I define microaggression scenarios is someone thinking that they have superior status over the other, and consequently, it means that they think the other person has inferior status. And it doesn't matter um, whether it's true or not. The point is, it's their perception. The other thing I talked about in part one in instances of where it occurs is most of the time we talk about it in the context of race, gender, ethnicity. But I did mention that it occurs in class status, and it occurs in people of the same race, it occurs in nationality, it occurs based on cultural ideology, cultural perception, cultural socialization. All these are areas where people acquire um, microaggression habits, and it happens in daily life every day in your professional life, even among friends who come from different backgrounds. And I also talked about examples like mansplaining, gaslighting, blackballing, imitators, and imitators, people who are imitating other people's habits or trying to reframe other people's ideas. I also talked about it in situations of what I call accent translation or diction translation. And these are all acts of microaggression habits that occur in everyday life. So, in part two, I want to start talking about it with the understanding that microaggression habits are really equivalent to emotional, psychological, and verbal abuse. Uh, they might be subtle, but they do have a corrosive effect on the person who's at the receiving end of it. I don't want to call them victims, but this is very personal to the person who's receiving it. And I also want to talk about consequences to health. One of the big ones, which is weathering. I was participating in Robert Hood Johnson, Barnabas Health, 21-day challenge about health, because I'm an advisory board member for the social impact um, and community investment, where we look at how disparities and inequities in healthcare based on um, race, and weathering was one of the things that came up in one of the articles that I talked about. And another thing that I learned, which I didn't know about, was the high allostatic load, where people who are experiencing microaggression on a consistent level start developing these feelings that create an allostatic load, which leads to weathering, which is they age faster, they get sick more frequently, and all sorts of other side effect that comes with microaggressions that we would not otherwise know. And the other thing is depression. The other thing is anxiety and panic attacks. Uh, Confidence erosion, emotional and psychological stress, low self-esteem. The internal conflict of constantly being um, in this fight or flight mode when you are experiencing aggression towards you. And to tell you the honest truth, um, we need to really be mindful and self examine a whole lot of other things, even the negative labeling, calling black women angry black women, or calling people emotional when they are just being passionate about what they believe in, or they're being advocates for what they believe in. But it's meant in a way, like I mentioned in part one, patronizing, condescending, trying to shut you down, trying to put you in your place. Um, all these subtle and sometimes covert acts of aggression really have major consequences of health. Um, and we really have to be mindful at how we conduct ourselves and how we perceive the other. So, the very first solution that I want to talk about today is practice what we call in my culture Ubuntu. Ubuntu, at its core, is I am because you are. I will only be whole if the other person that I'm engaging with, and the other person that I live with, and the other person that I deal with is also whole. There's no way I'm going to be whole. It's the ultimate definition of equalness. Ubuntu. So try to practice Ubuntu. And I am so proud that this concept is really, this philosophy is really embedded in my culture, in the traditions and the practices of my culture, my Shona culture. So, one of the things that you have to always remember is practice Ubuntu. Practice the fact that you are because the other person is. And if somebody else is not whole, you can't be whole. And your sense or entitlement to this superior status is really superficial. The second one, which I always try to teach my children, and we always talk about it, is active listening. This is a challenge for many people because usually when somebody is talking, especially in professional environment or even in family um, context where people feel comfortable, um, people are constantly listening to respond. They are not listening to understand. So active listening is really about trying to understand what the person is talking about. And this comes into focus with this accent translation and diction translation that I talked about, and in many other contexts where you are actually trying to focus on errors of omission or errors or or the dissimilarities in how people express themselves. So let's talk about active listening. The third solution is what I call practice curious mindfulness. Be curious and mindful by seeking understanding and insights. That the person in front of you come with a wealth of experiences and knowledge that you have never been privileged to. And if you sit down and you were to engage as mutual equals and engage with um, the idea of curiosity to learn more about the person in front of you or next to you, you will walk away richer with the knowledge and even wisdom that you may not have benefited from because you are trying to impose or you are trying to only push your perspective of the world or of life or of your culture. The second thing that I started doing is disconnecting and disengaging, especially in situations where the media, cable and network news, because the content that they thrive on is very negative. I actually just listen to news in brief in the morning from certain channels that I just want to listen to, and they give me a whole aspect of global news that is not usually covered in cable or network news. Disengage and disconnect. The other thing is I try, which I used to do, is to try and educate someone when they are engaged in these microaggression habits. But what I notice also is people sometimes are not willing to receive. So if you have an opportunity to engage and enlighten, and I really don't like the word enlighten because it assumes that the other person is ignorant. They are only ignorant to the context that they are not exposed. They lack what we call socio-economic and socio-social uh, cultural exposure. So if you, I prefer the engagement, mindful engagement of just discussing. I want to know about you, and you educate me about your culture. I educate you about my culture. The other thing is learn to reject narratives that do not apply. Oh my goodness, there are so many narratives that have been framed around people of certain gender, certain background, certain cultural perspective. And when you sit there, you say to yourself, um, but that's not my life. That's not what I experienced. I just call it the Tarzan syndrome. The movie Tarzan, where people of a Eurocentric persuasion would present these Tarzan movies and say, "Oh, this is how people in Africa behave," and I'm sitting there thinking, but it's a white man in a skimpy, I don't know, little lap, swinging from tree to tree. Maybe that's what they do in Europe, because in my country where I grew up, we didn't live like that. So I rejected that Tarzan narrative because it didn't represent my life, and I would always bring it up as an analogy and making people understand that, are you also realizing that what you are portraying to me is what I believe about you? But even if you're trying to say it's about me, because I know from my experience and my life, it doesn't represent me. The other thing is weed out unhealthy people. And I mean, if somebody constantly is being microaggressive towards you, get them out of your life. And finally, ignore. You don't have to catch the ball. So watch it roll out of sight. If I can't have a conversation of equals, or we can't engage on an equal footing, I'm going to start ignoring you. And it's very intentional ignoring, because I have just decided you are not the person that I would like to waste my time talking to. So, as always, remember, the best solutions to health come from within. And please follow us on our channel, YouTube channel, hashtag PLDH, and on Instagram, Doc Noro. And if nobody told you they love you today, I do. And remember, brighten the corner where you are. Ciao, ciao.